Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Beaconstac webinar. Today, we're going to talk to you about beacons and museums. I have to tell you, I'm really excited. Today, I'm joined by Al Juarez, VP and Sales of Marketing of Gillo. And today, we're going to bring to you the combined experience that we at Mobstack and at Gillo have with beacons and museums. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I know some of you are dialing in from different parts of the world. So we really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. I really hope that over the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to have a lot of interesting information to share. We're going to cover a number of different things. So I'll just, walk you through the agendas on the left side. You can take a look. But before I get started, I'd like to just say, Al, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. You're welcome. We're happy to be here.
Welcome to the webinar.
Done some work with museums. You're welcome. We're hoping to share some of that experience with the folks around the world.
Today's webinar is about how beacons can add interactivity to museums. As many of you know, beacons are finding applications across verticals in retail, in exhibition spaces, in amusement parks, and museums are, of course, a natural extension. After all, they're physical spaces that people attend and people go to. So we're seeing that beacons are actually getting a lot of interest in museums around the world. In today's webinar, Al and I will share our experiences working with museums doing beacon pilots, the things that we have learned, some of the things that you should keep in mind when you're doing beacons or thinking about doing a beacon pilot, and any other information that we've managed to gather in terms of our experiences, we're happy to share with you. I'd like to point out that today's webinar is open to questions. Please type in your please type in your question at any time into the question window. We will be answering all questions at the very end. Don't worry, we'll give you enough time to ask us questions and have them answered live. So just make sure that if something comes up and you'd like to ask us a question, type it into the window and we'll make sure that we get to it at the end. So just a quick look at today's agenda. First, we'll cover the basics of iBeacon technology, how it works, and what a beacon really is. Then we'll delve into how beacons can enhance the museum experience. And what is it that beacons can really do? Why should we care as people in the museum world? What the different use cases are from beacons in a museum. So what can you do with them? Can you use them for specific improvements, efficiency, or is there something you can do for your visitors? We'll also talk about things to consider before you go about deploying beacons, things that you should keep in mind, things that you should watch out for and plan ahead for. And finally, of course, we'll be learning from successful museum deployments, and Al, of course, will be sharing a bunch of his experience working with museums at Gillo. So that's the agenda for today. So a quick primer about beacons. What are beacons really? Beacons fundamentally are low-cost, low-power transmitters. They're radio transmitters, essentially. The thing is, they're essentially transmitting on a protocol or using a protocol called Bluetooth 4.0 or Bluetooth Smart, and also known as BLE or Bluetooth Low Energy. Essentially, the beacon is just transmitting this radio signal, and it's this signal that's received by a mobile device. And the mobile device uses the signal to detect what is generally known as its microlocation or its proximity. And this is how you're able to use beacons to do location-based experiences indoors, which is not currently something you can do with, say, GPS, which is outdoor location. That is why beacons are interesting. That's why beacons are getting attention around the world and across verticals, because you can do indoor location using beacons, you can do indoor proximity, and you can do indoor positioning using beacons. And how beacons work is actually fairly straightforward. A beacon is transmitting a signal. This signal is a signal that's traveling across in all directions, and it's a smartphone or a mobile device, or any device actually that is capable of receiving this Bluetooth low energy signal that actually interprets the signal. So it receives this signal, and then interprets what it receives in the signal. So the transmitted signal typically has some information in it, like it's usually a series of numbers, a major number, a minor number, an identifier, and any other extraneous information that the beacon may be transmitting. And it's the mobile device that uses this information that's present in the signal to perhaps calculate its proximity or even identify the beacon that it's near. So if you look at this diagram, you'll see that it's the mobile device that kind of figures out whether it's really close or really close to the beacon. So is it like 0.5 meters away, or is it 2 meters away, or is it fairly far away, which is maybe 20 meters away? So it's the smartphone or the mobile device that is using the signal to determine a bunch of things and to calculate its position or calculate its proximity and even identify the beacon. So the numbers that are coming from the beacon are used by the app running on the smartphone to actually know which beacon it is it's receiving the signal from. I'd like to point out that beacons don't transmit content. What that means is they're not pushing files out, they're not transferring files that you download onto your smartphone or anything like that. It's just a simple series of numbers, a very basic series of bytes that are being transmitted. It's the app that's running on your smartphone that's doing all the work, that's identifying the beacon and then deciding to do something with it. So that's just a basic primer on how beacons work. I recognize some of you, in fact, most of you may already be familiar with this, but we found that it's important to help explain how beacons exactly work in conjunction with smartphones. Now, we're of course here talking about museums. So the question really is, how do beacons and how can beacons enhance museum experiences? So we've of course found that there are many things that museums like to do in all our conversations with different museums and the ones that are run pilots. The thing that seems to excite museums the most is that they can actually deliver more content and more context to the exhibits that you're standing in front of, or to you as you're standing in front of exhibits and walking around the galleries. They want to be able to tell you, oh, you're standing in front of the lion salad, which is part of this, it comes from this civilization and it's these many 100 years old, and here's a video and here's an audio clip, and it's all information that they're doing, and it's all information that they're pushing already. I mean, think about it. All of us go to museums, and so many of us actually end up renting that audio guide. We take the audio guide with us as we're walking around the museum because we want to learn more. Beacons are a great way to deliver contextual information. And that's essentially, you can enhance interactivity because now you can go beyond audio. The person is carrying a smartphone. It may be their own. It may be something that they rent from someone, maybe the museum itself. And you can enhance interactivity because you can now play audio clips, you can play video clips, you can show them more content, maybe more write-ups, maybe the curator's view on a bunch of things. And now as you go further, you can actually start to really mix things up. You can now start bringing social media into the mix. Think about the way social media, or say something like Facebook, works today. Facebook, is online, of course, and you may even have a page for your museum on Facebook. It wouldn't be cool if you have people standing in front of an exhibit and then talking about that exhibit and being able to pull up what others have said about that exhibit, and all around this whole location-based experience using beacons. But bringing content from Facebook to the person standing in front of the exhibit, and also the other way, which is taking what people are saying about those exhibits and sharing what they feel about these exhibits with social media. So we think that's really very powerful from the standpoint of what it can do for the next wave of museum experiences. And lastly, I want to talk a little bit about gathering data. There's so much data that is currently not available to a museum curator or to the people who run a museum. How do people behave inside a gallery? What do they find interesting? What do they not find interesting? How do they make their way from one set of exhibits to another? Gathering behavioral data is one of the big promises of beacons. You can now almost watch what your visitors are doing. You can see how they go around. You can see what they find interesting. And when they tell you using the app or something, hey, I like this, you can actually go and use that data to do something else. Maybe you use that information to guide your next series of exhibits or galleries. So that's in a very broad level. That's kind of how beacons can be used in museums. But now I want to, I want to just talk a little bit about how you can put beacons to use in museums. Actually, at this point, I'd like to get Al's comments. Al, would you like to add something about how beacons can be put to use in museums?
I think you've really hit on the high points. I think that museum visitors, the social aspect of it, being able to curate, make a comment about something that you see in a museum, being able to connect with other people who like a painting or are in love with a painting. Some people view pieces of art as old friends, and so to be able to widen that circle and to be able to connect with somebody in the same city that is in love with the same friend that they have, maybe it's a Van Gogh painting, maybe it's a piece of sculpture. That's something that museums have told us is really key is to creating that social network of like-minded individuals. So I think you're spot on. I think what the direction that you're going in is spot on.
Great, thank you, Al. So this is some of these ideas that we have seen been discussed with museums, and some of these are things we've actually worked on ourselves. And here's just a few. I'm sure many of you on the webinar today have many ideas that you're all like just waiting to implement. So, but let's just go over a few that we've seen that have been very powerful. One is kind of straightforward: ticketless entry. You get rid of manual paper tickets. You can send someone a ticket. It's inside the app. You can know when they've entered the museum. You know that it's just that many people that they've bought tickets for. It's really straightforward. Nobody needs to be checked. Nobody needs to punch paper. It's pretty straightforward in terms of how you do ticketless entry. There's something that we were talking about earlier is you can actually recommend exhibits or recommend other pieces inside your museum based on what someone is doing. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say I have been standing in front of, as Al was saying, let's say maybe I'm a huge fan of Van Gogh, and I've been looking at a painting for maybe 20 minutes. A museum can now use this information, the fact that I have been standing in front of the same painting for the last 20 minutes. It can detect that using beacons. It can have its app, be aware of that, and then say, hey, do you really like this painting? Maybe then you'd like to check out the 5 other paintings that we have of Van Gogh. And this is where they are in the museum. This is the history. This is why they're really great paintings, or this is why they're considered real pieces of art. And here's how you can get there. Here's the navigation to getting to that part of the museum. So recommending exhibits or making recommendations on what visitors will like will help museums essentially engage visitors more, keep them longer in museums, get them more engaged, perhaps make them like something so much that they keep coming back, they donate to the museum, and there are all kinds of benefits of essentially getting people to engage more with the exhibits and the galleries in the museum. You could also use beacons to do something, just more practical, like, information about facilities. Maybe how do you get to the restrooms? How do you get to specific parts of the museum? Navigation, wayfinding. That's something which, it makes sense, especially because museums tend to be really large, right? In terms of just square footage, right? You're looking at 50,000, 60,000, 100,000 square feet. I mean, even bigger in many cases, spread across a large number of floors in some cases. So information, wayfinding, and navigation, those are well-known use cases and well-known benefits that you can deliver using indoor location and beacons. Some of the other interesting things that we've seen is we can use information that is available in terms of what I was just telling you. If I've been standing in front of, let's say, the statue of David, right? I'm in that museum in Florence, and standing in front of the statue of David, and I've been standing there long enough, and it's the system knows that I've been there maybe 30, 40 minutes now. The app can now do things like tell me, hey, like a statue of David, would you like to own a souvenir from the gift shop? And we have a lot of different options in terms of what you can take away from the museum today. So you can upsell mementos, gifts from your souvenir shop. You can tell them. So in some sense, you can also connect to a commerce angle for your museum, which is you'd like to sell more stuff in the museum shop. So using behavior, using proximity-based messaging and proximity-based data, you can essentially say, hey, maybe you'd be interested in this. It's similar to the way recommendation works that we just talked about, but it could also be used to push sales of specific, gifts from the souvenir shop just based on someone's interest. So what's really exciting about that is that now it's very personal. What you recommend to me it may not be something you recommend to Al, or you may recommend something else altogether. So we think those are really exciting in terms of commerce. Of course, you can also do some things like tell someone if they're walking past the cafeteria, hey, this is what the menu is for today. This is what we have cooking. This is what the menu is, and you can come in and place an order. You can do it, things like that. And some people would like to, maybe just know what's in the cafeteria before even heading there. And lastly, we've been talking about gathering behavioral data, but essentially it's the same thing, gathering data on the visits. Now you can actually get really detailed analytics from Beacon data. So you can look at heat maps, you can look at paths, you can look at all kinds of frequency, recency of visits, all of this information. And these are some of the things that you can do, putting beacons to use in museums. These are, of course, ideas. Many museums are trying this out or trying to do this in their pilots. And we think you should try them out too. So that's just a little bit about that. Moving forward, let's assume many of you are here today on our webinar because, well, you guys have beacons and you've decided that, hey, it's time to experiment with beacons in your museum. So we have a couple of things that we'd just like to talk about because this is something that often comes up, and it's just good to know as you go about planning your beacon strategy. In terms of beacon installation, right, this is obviously the most important question that you'll get from your chief designer. What's the color of the beacon? Can we get beacons that are white, that are black, and that match the shade of our walls, right? Or whatever it is that we use near the exhibits. So when you purchase beacons, you have to consider some of these factors, which could be around color and aesthetic, essentially aesthetic related factors. And then you have sometimes it's just designed. You don't want a beacon, or many curators don't like beacons that just draw too much attention to them. They want something that looks plain or almost just disappears. Another factor is power options. What kind of power do you have or do you need for the beacon? If you pick a beacon that is powered or needs a wall, like a socket to plug into, then the kind of installations that enables also tends to be influenced by where you can get power to. So in that sense, it becomes more limiting. So maybe you want battery-powered beacons because you can place them anywhere. But so these are some of the things that you have to think about before you go ahead and decide to purchase beacons. And of course, sometimes if they're going to be outdoors, you have to think about, hey, are my beacons, outdoor proof or all weather beacons? So these are all factors that come in. And of course, once you have the beacons, you have to configure these beacons. And most manufacturers ship some kind of configuration software so you can set up the major number and the minor number, even what is called the UUID. So that becomes an important consideration. How do you go about numbering your beacons? So one common method is to use the major number to kind of denote the gallery or just a broader area within your museum, and then use minor numbers to actually narrow it down to a very specific exhibit or a very specific group of exhibits. Maybe 2 or 3 exhibits are being mapped to the same beacon. So that's how you do that in terms of beacon installation. And placement, I talked about it. You want it to be unobtrusive. I'm sure your chief designer will give you, give you enough grief if the beacons don't comply with the kind of design language that the museum is essentially used to using all over in its space. So those are some of the things about beacon installation, yeah, I think, and there are a number of manufacturers who make beacons. Gilo, of course, is a manufacturer of beacons and has, of course, made some excellent ones and has deployed some of them as well. So, Al, is there something that you'd like to add to beacon installation and what I just said?
No, I'll probably touch on a couple of the themes when I'm talking about some of the do's and don'ts and some of the experience that we've gained. But yeah, I think that you're spot on in this in your approach.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So another thing that comes up when you start working with beacons is, for those of us who've been looking and working in the indoor location space for a while, we're used to thinking of indoor location as leading to some kind of XY coordinate, right? Some kind of way of determining a precise location in terms of a set of coordinates. But here's the thing that that we learned the hard way working with a bunch of our pilots is that in many cases it's not possible to exactly determine where the person is because there are a number of factors that influence positioning. But more importantly, if you end up having a situation where many exhibits, and this happens in museums a lot, are very close to each other, you can't possibly put beacons on every single exhibit. And even if you do, the problem you'll end up with is there'll be so much beacon signal interference that you won't be able to tell exactly what the user or the visitor is standing in front of, because there'll be too many different exhibits that are just so close. So one of the things that we learned doing these pilots is that it's better to actually use proximity in terms of a way to measure what you're close to instead of a precise set of coordinates, because that doesn't work as well. You don't have such kind of precision. But the other thing is you can also use proximity to do something fairly interesting. You can say, hey, here's what you're standing near, and you may send them like a list of 3 exhibits that they're standing in front of. Now, obviously, the visitor is standing in front of those exhibits and knows that there are 3 things in front of them. So you can do things like this to alleviate some of the problems that beacon signal interference creates, especially when you have lots of exhibits really close to each other, which is very common in museums. And so we found that using proximity instead of a precise set of coordinates, and then being able to group exhibits, and say, hey, this one beacon maps to these 3 exhibits, and then it allows the app and the user experience inside the app to disambiguate and help the user or the visitor know, okay, I see that I'm looking at these 3 objects. So that's what we recommend. Just keep in mind that visitor position is not really precise, so you got to plan for proximity. Another thing that comes up, which comes up once you start putting beacons, in your museum, and you've basically got more than about, let's say, 5 or 10 beacons, you have to start worrying about management and monitoring of these beacons. What happens if these beacons fall off? Maybe you've used an adhesive. What if they fall off and you can't find them? How do you know they're even not there on the wall anymore? So management of different kinds. There's physical management, physical monitoring in terms of, sometimes they can be stolen. So is there theft, physical theft, or in some cases the battery just essentially stopped work. The battery ran out, so the beacon isn't working anymore, which means it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. Maybe sending a message or helping someone learn more about a specific exhibit. So the thing that we recommend is that eventually you'll end up you'll end up picking a beacon platform which helps you do this, which is management and monitoring of beacons. And the approach ends up being, if you don't have this, you'll have to do this manually. You'll have to have people walking around your museum floors, using an app, trying to detect every beacon that's around, seeing which ones are on, which ones are not, sometimes using pen and paper, maybe comparing against an Excel sheet or something. But that goes really out of hand very fast. So a beacon platform like Beaconstac tracks data coming automatically from the field, which is apps that are coming into contact with these beacons, all your visitors walking through your floors every day. All that data is collated, it's captured, and the beacons are monitored. So we look at last ping time, we look at their battery life, battery levels, and that's the way you can be proactive. You know that, hey, these beacons, which are over there in your exhibit number 32A, those need to be replaced, and then the platform helps you do that. It's usually a combination of software, running on an app, and also a web-based information portal, which helps you keep track of these things. But whichever solution you decide to go with, you will end up finding that the management and monitoring of these beacons is just as significant a task. And lastly, the security is very important, because now these beacons, since they are, after all, very small computers, very tiny computers, they have firmware, they have software running on them. They are vulnerable to hacking attempts. And this is not to say that all beacons are, but there are precautions that we recommend that you take so that your beacons are safe. So there are a number of things that we recommend. You can set up a mechanism for firmware updates. You can detect unauthorized authentication attempts, and also you can go with some of the features like encryption of major and minor numbers and frequent rotation. All of these things allow you to essentially prevent your beacons from getting misconfigured by someone with malicious intent. So those are some of the things that I wanted to just talk to you about in terms of, if you're putting a beacon strategy together, if you're planning to deploy beacons, these are some of the things that you will run into. These are some of the things that you really should be thinking of before you decide to start going ahead and deploying. Moving on, at this point, we'd like to talk to you about how we helped a museum pilot beacons. And the museum here is the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. We did a pilot with the Media Lab over there, and some of the screenshots and things that I'm showing you are real images of what we actually ended up doing. So the Met essentially said, how can we use beacons to enhance the user experience, and essentially wanted to deliver more contextual information, some of the things that I just described, gather data on visitor behavior, and be able to essentially create a much richer experience in terms of allowing visitors to consume video and audio clips and read more about exhibits that they're standing in front of. And that's really what we did, working with the Met. That's what we ended up doing. We used Beaconstac, which is the Beacon content management proximity platform that we have built. And what you see on the left is a screenshot from the pilot app that we did for the Met. This is an example of what you would see when you walked to a specific section called, in this case, it was called Asian Art. And essentially it would say and these are the bird-shaped vessel and the pixel deer were the exhibits in that particular area. And on the right side, you can see that setting this up was actually very easy for the digital media folks at the Met, because they were able to use the Beaconstac content management system to set up their beacons, set up the major numbers, minor numbers, all in our web content management system, and be able to essentially assign rules and assign content to these beacons. I'll just walk you through that in the next slide. So how is it that this content of the photograph and the video, how are they associated with the beacon? So what we ended up doing is, or rather what they did is, they used features inside Beaconstac which allows you to set up what are called content cards. You can set up these content cards, you can define them, you can say, okay, when someone comes close to this particular exhibit, this beacon, which in this case is the Arms and Armor beacon, I'd like you to pop up this card when it's this particular exhibit, and then that becomes an action. And then when you move, and essentially you can upload the content, you can upload the images, you can write the content that you want delivered, and on the left you see what it really looked like in the app. So all of this allows someone who's essentially in charge of the content, in charge of essentially managing all of this, to work with a web-based application that allows them to make changes on the fly and have the app essentially just automatically pull down all this data and all this content from the cloud. So what this meant was there was no need to update the app. There was no need to change the app every single time you added beacons or removed beacons or changed what was near a beacon. And that we think is really interesting. So in this particular case, what you're seeing is a proximity-based information trigger. So when someone walked closer to the lion cellar, that's when they saw all of these pieces of information, in which case it's a photograph, there's textual content, and actually if you scroll down in the real app, you'll see that there was actually also an audio clip and a video clip. So that's a brief, I guess, sneak peek into how we were able to work with the Digital Media Lab at the New York Met to make this happen using Beaconstac. And so what I want to do at this point is I'd like to hand over to Al, who's got a bunch of information to share with us. So Al, over to you.
Okay, thanks, Ravi. I appreciate it. So when museums first express interest in using beacons, our initial question to them is always around the user experience. What experience are they trying to create for their patrons? And the one thing that we want to point out to them or make them aware of is that this is not an opportunity to recreate chat labels or signs. This is a new medium, and it's an opportunity to expose content on the 95+% of exhibits that most museums have in storage. It's an opportunity to create new exhibits using proximity, as Ravi has pointed out, as an integral part of the museum experience. And it's an opportunity to create an immersive experience that encourages a deeper exploration of the museum's physical space, be it at different times of the day, different days of the week, but always with the intent to create a deeper emotional attachment between the patrons and the exhibits that they come to see. Lots of museums are digitizing their collections. However, one of the problems that we see them wrestle with is how to unlock that content in a way that's relevant and contextual to visitors. And we have a museum locally that has arguably the largest furniture collection in the country. They have hundreds of chairs in storage, for example, and the issue is that only a few of those chairs can be on display at any one time. The museum has tons of content digitized on their chair collection. The problem is how to share the content in a way that's relevant to the average museum patron. Quite honestly, the content won't be consumed by patrons if it's just thrown on the museum's website. So let's say I'm standing in front of a display of chairs from the early 20th century. As a museum, we have hundreds of other chairs, but I can't display them all. So the solution is to share the content with the patrons while they're standing in front of the display, because that's when I'm standing in front of a display, that's when that content is relevant to me, that's when it's contextual, and that's when it enriches the museum experience. Density and spacing of beacons. Again, this goes back to the user experience. So, what experience is the museum trying to create for their patrons? As Ravi mentioned, considering the floor layout and the fact that the beacons are basically little radio transmitters. If the displays are packed too tightly on the floor, each with a beacon, there's going to be likely a radio frequency traffic jam and a less than ideal user experience. You'll have what we call signal flipping. You'll have a patron a patron whose mobile device is flipping back and forth between one beacon to the other, and that can be a less than ideal experience for both the museum staff and for the patrons. So you really have to pick and choose a reasonable number of beacons to expose this content and avoid creating that radio frequency traffic jam. Another issue that you really don't discover until you actually start doing deployments is locating the trigger location versus the beacon location. This takes into account aesthetics, the density of beacons, and the placement of beacons. The trigger location is where you want somebody standing in relation to the painting or the sculpture or whatever it is that they're looking at. And it might be 15 feet away or 10 feet away from a mural. Placing a beacon on the mural wall it probably won't be an ideal situation. So you have to figure out, we have to figure out how to place that, how to match up the trigger location with the beacon location. So understanding that physical space and understanding if you want the beacon to be visible. As Robbie mentioned, some museums don't want, they want that beacon to be basically invisible, so that maybe it's the same color as the wall. Other museums, there's a thought that maybe you want the beacon to be visible, maybe as a visible cue to inform visitors that there's more content available for them to unlock. This could be a strategy on the museum's part to drive more downloads of the mobile application. So we've made observations that when museum visitors see one beacon and they have that wow moment, they start looking around near them to see where there are other beacons. Can I find another one? Can I see something else? Can I unlock something else? So what we advise folks museums is to start small. Begin with a simple exhibit and definitely have a roadmap or a strategy as to what it is that you want to achieve. Definitely, we have found that synchronizing and involving the education manager, the curator, the collections manager, and the marketing team pays huge dividends. They all have to be involved. Many museums have a small staff. Many of them wear multiple hats. So involving everyone at the outset and making sure that everybody is on the same page with what you're trying to achieve is critical to the beacon being experience being successful for for everyone. Train your front door staff to educate and inform patrons on how to download and install the mobile application. If you're going to do mobile application installation downloads at the front door, have Wi-Fi and a strong signal at the front door for your visitors to download and install the mobile application. And these are some of the basic running and blocking and tackling issues that we run into, but they're certainly important. Have signage near the front door, educating and informing your patrons to download and install the mobile application. Make sure that they know that there's something there for them to discover. It'd be a shame to make the investment and not have them be aware that this additional content is there for them to unlock. Have a link on your website for patrons to easily download to find the mobile app either on the App Store or on Google Play, so that they can easily download and install the mobile app. So some success stories for us. So the Public Museum of Grand Rapids is a museum here in town, and they have a Collect A to Z exhibit. It's A is for automobile, for example. F is for furniture, And it's essentially a scavenger hunt for school-age children from grade school all the way through junior high and high school. And the objective of the scavenger hunt is to draw patrons through all 3 floors of the museum. And what the Collect A to Z scavenger hunt has been in the past has been a paper scavenger hunt where patrons approach the front desk. They ask for the scavenger hunt sheet. They also ask for an answer key, so they have the answer key given to them right away. And the point is to go see A for automobile and see all the things that, all the collections items that begin with A, and then learn something and then be able to answer a question afterwards, and then go to the letter B, the letter C, all the way through the letter Z. And the idea is to expose content on that 95% of the exhibits that are in storage. And what the museum found was that digitizing this exhibit, the Collect A to Z scavenger hunt, plays into their long-term digital strategy. And as a result of having digitized it, we have found that the kids really do, they've connected to the scavenger hunt in a different kind of way than they did before. Suffice it to say that the world is digital. Kids have iPods, kids have Android phones. They bring those to field trips with them, and there's more engagement happening now through with the school-age children through the digitized version of this than we had before. And there's much more interest in staying with the Collect A to Z exhibit all the way through the letter Z, Art Prize is another success story, and Art Prize is a $500,000 publicly juried art competition covering 3 square miles of downtown Grand Rapids, Michigan, every September. If you've never heard of Art Prize, you go ahead and Google Art Prize Grand Rapids, and you'll see that it's transformed the city for 3 weeks every September. And this past September, I think we had over 1,400 entries. And it's an amazing art experience for the entire city. There's art on the river. There's art on the bridges. Bridges are transformed into pieces of art. Public spaces, restaurants, bars, etc. Sidewalks, wherever you can have a piece of art, that's where the art is. And suffice it to say, if you've never been to Art Prize, I definitely suggest you put it on your bucket list. And Site Lab at Morton House was a venue that housed 12 entries. And what the artists wanted to do was to be able to tell their story of how they created their art, especially when they weren't on site to interact with the public, because if you're there as an artist and you're able to tell your story in a compelling way to the visitors, you're going to get more votes. So you're going to get more votes, and you're going to be up there, in contention for that $250,000 first prize. And so, using GLO spaces, the artists were able to share their own compelling stories through the use of still images, audio, and video, and show visitors when the artist wasn't around. They were able to show how their entries were created from start to finish. Site Lab in 2014, Morton House in 2014 won the prize for best venue. And Site Lab credits the innovative use of GLO spaces and beacons in helping their venue win best prize, best venue for Art Prize 2014. No doubt we will probably be back. The GLO and beacons will probably have a bigger presence in Art Prize 2015. And hopefully, if you're listening out there, and you make the trek to Grand Rapids, you'll be able to experience that and maybe vote for something when Art Prize comes around again. These mobile apps are still out there on the App Store, so if you want, you're free to download those mobile apps and take a look at and see how they were created. Ravi, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Al. Did you want to just say something about GLO before I continue?
Sure, absolutely. So GLO is a proximity communications company. We use beacons, and we started out with our main emphasis in the museum space. It's a perfect museums are a perfect use case for Bluetooth low energy technology. We've been finding applications in industrial uses, industrial applications. Beacons go way beyond retail, way beyond museums, and we are pleasantly finding all kinds of new applications for Bluetooth low energy beacons in industrial, commercial settings, as well as outdoor settings. We're actually going to be doing a national park, Sleeping Bear Dunes, this summer. So outdoors, indoors, we really believe that hyper-local, micro-location technology is the wave of the future. It definitely gives eyes to mobile devices and helps site owners be able to better understand who's visiting their location, what they're doing in that space, and so that they can create personas around those visitors and be able to better serve and understand visitors to their locations.
Great, thanks a lot, Al. Thank you again for I really I thought it was really exciting learning about some of the really neat stuff that you guys have done with Grand Rapids Public Museum and ArtPrize. At this point, that pretty much brings us to the end of our main content. We're happy to take questions at this point. As I mentioned earlier, please feel free to type in your questions in the questions window, and we'll be answering them one by one between Al and me. I'll take the first question. The first one is a question about NFC. So this person would like to know if NFC technology is more appropriate for proximity pinpointing, and in particular for individual display association. It's a good question. The problem with NFC that we've seen is that it's basically a few centimeters. You have to take your device really close to the NFC object. And we think that that's actually a deal breaker in the case of museums, because the curators are not going to let you get real people to come that close to exhibits. It's really not something that we have seen. I mean, you could place the NFC sticker a little further away, but one of the nice things about iBeacon and the whole beacon-based method is that it's really just built in to all devices these days. Smart iOS, Android, all of them have BLE support, and that makes it a lot more universal. So we still recommend beacons over NFC.
Ravi, I would add that NFC requires an action on the part of the user. Mm-hmm. So the beauty of BLE is what I would call the human laziness factor. You don't have to do anything. You just need to have your phone with you, and you'll get a pop-up or whatever, however the mobile app is configured. But you without having to do anything. Without having to ask the user to do anything, they get information. NFC requires people to get close to something, look for something, and tap on something, and BLE does not have that requirement.
Great point, Al. Thank you for that. Okay, the next question we're going to take is about the issue of security. When is increased security necessary? How is it achieved? And what does it take in terms of application complexity? Well, the first thing that I'd like to say is that security is pretty much a default, because the main issue is if you go with, and I think it really boils down to the choice of Beacon hardware and their support for security. The main issue really is that if you go with much more basic beacon hardware, it becomes very easy to reprogram the beacon. You can reprogram the beacon. There are all kinds of vulnerability attacks. You can restart a beacon and get in when it's still booting up. The password sometimes, many of them are not password protected properly. Sometimes your beacons are installed with default passwords, and then somebody just figures out how to reconfigure them. So that's really what ends up happening in many cases. So security is a default, is what I'd say. And how you'd achieve this is by choosing beacon manufacturers that have hardware support for increased security in terms of some of the techniques that I just described, being able to password protect, be able to rotate major minor numbers, UUID encryption, etc. And in terms of application complexity, I think, as long as your SDK, the SDK that you use in your app is compliant with it or supports it, which is the case when you use a beacon company, a beacon hardware manufacturer that has it, it's really not that much work for you as an application developer. So that's pretty much it on that question.
Robbie, can I add a little bit?
Yeah, please.
So I think security comes both. There's physical security and there's digital security. Having a beacon that you can screw down to a surface. Beacons disappear from museums if they aren't things in general disappear from places, not just museums, but from retail stores, wherever, if they aren't securely fastened to a surface. If you have kids like to explore, they're very inquisitive. I love children. But they tend to pick up things and walk away with things that they're not supposed to. So you want to be able to make sure that physically the beacon is screwed down to a surface. Right. Our beacons are, speaking of digital security, they have a 6-digit passcode. So the GLO beacons, you just can't walk up to it and just change the major, the minor, the UUID. You have to actually gain access to that beacon through a 6-digit passcode, and they can also be screwed down to a surface.
Right.
Robbie, I have a couple questions that have come my way.
Please do. I was just going to ask you to do that.
Yep. So one question is, what other factors apart from aesthetics should a museum consider before buying beacons for the project? I think we just mentioned a couple. Physical security, making sure that they can be securely fastened to a surface. I think digital security, making sure that not just anyone can walk up to a beacon and change the major, the minor, the UUID. Those are definitely considerations. Battery life and being able to get battery life, remaining battery life from the beacon, so that without having to guess or just having to set, make a mark on a calendar. Okay, 12 months from now or 8 months from now, we're just going to go around and start checking batteries or just start buying batteries. You definitely want to be able to know that hey, the beacon on the 3rd floor in front of the Van Gogh Starry Night, that beacon needs its batteries changed. Being able to easily change batteries without being able to easily change the batteries is another consideration. So you definitely want to be able to know that your maintenance staff can handle this. It's a low-level thing. It's an easy thing for them to do, and there's not a lot of rocket science that goes into that.
Great. Al, you can, if you have any other questions, you can take those as well.
Yeah. So what's the average cost of a beacon? What's the average cost of a beacon, and how many do I need for a pilot project? So we did some market research, and we've actually done enough deployments that 12 to 15 beacons is going to be, or 10 to 15 beacons is going to be about the right number for a pilot project. It's not too overwhelming for the curator, for the education staff, for the collection staff. It's something that's 12, 13, 14 beacons is not too much. You want to start with a grouped exhibit, and that's something that's not going to be too overwhelming on the staff. I would never recommend 50 or 75 or 100 beacons and just start big. No, I would always recommend start small. Average cost of a beacon is anywhere from $30 to $35, depending on which beacon you're using. So yeah, that's what you're going to find on the marketplace today.
Great. I have a question here, which is it's a great question. The question really is about the need for a community app. So what happens in the case when you have the main issue really is that consumers don't really want to install a million apps on their phones. So the question really is, what can we do to provide wider use apps or community apps for regional cultural venues, so that there's like one common app that's shared by a number of them. And I think it's a great point that's been brought up, because that's something we're seeing as well. The biggest challenge that many businesses that are figuring out beacons and their use is how to get the app into the user's smartphone. How do you get them to install it? And if you've already gotten like 100,000 downloads, that's great, because in that case, you already have a really good reason why someone has to have your app on their phone. But yes, definitely the idea behind a community app, being able to use an app which is widely used already, and using that for beacon-based messaging, or being able to piggyback on top of that, those are some of the ideas that we are actually seeing in the market. Another question is, there was a question here which is really interesting about, someone is asked about whether we've tried iBeacons in combination with Google Glass. Great question. What I'd like to say is actually we're working on, we actually find the Apple Watch a lot more exciting, and we think that wearables and beacons, are really exciting in that sense, because all of these wearables are typically BLE enabled, and with Apple Watch, slated to come out soon, which is end of Q1, we're really going to see a whole new set of possibilities around beacons, and beacons now that can move, because the watch could also be a beacon. So we think that that's exciting, and that's what we're looking at. And in fact, we're not the only ones. There are a bunch of folks looking at it. I have one more question, Al, before I hand it over to you again. I'm sure you have a few more. This one's about privacy issues. How do you address privacy issues when gathering visitor behavioral information? Very simple. Do not gather personally identifiable information. Even if you have it in the app, don't post it into your server. Don't collect it and then start doing stuff with it. Because once you do, you have to be compliant with numerous privacy laws in different states of the US. And if you have users, and of course in Europe, it's actually even more stringent. So we think it's best that you not capture personally identifiable information. And you stick to things that are anonymized pieces of information that you can use to run your analysis. So that's what we recommend. Al, do you have any questions that you'd like to take?
Yes. So we have a question from someone asking if a beacon can be sandwiched between two layers of paper and maybe run through a laminator to make a hanging. So a beacon is it's a printed circuit board, and it has a battery, either a coin cell battery or maybe a couple of AAA batteries, like GLO beacons do, and they have a case. So the beacon is not going to be so small that it's not going to be just a very thin paper-like circuit board. It's going to be a real piece of silicon with circuits on it and batteries. So probably would not work to run a beacon through the laminator unless you want to buy a new laminator. So yeah, that won't work.
All right. I think, at this point, I just have another one or two questions, and that's pretty much it at my end. So, Al, I think we should just about wrap up. I think we've, we're approaching the limit now, I think.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Right. So, Two questions left at this point. I'll just quickly answer those. Is there a limitation for the number of users a beacon can serve? For example, if a beacon is installed at a gate with high traffic, can it serve all of the users? Absolutely. A beacon is a transmitter. It doesn't interact with every single device, so it transmits every 100 milliseconds, every 200 milliseconds, and it's no problem at all. Last question, can you recommend the best sites to start with an iBeacon rollout? I want to start testing with a museum, but I'm not even sure how many beacons to buy just for testing. Al made a great point just now. Al recommended that you start with 12 or 15 beacons. That's just the right number. And in terms of a good place to start, you can start with Beaconstac. We have a 90-day pilot program for museums. It includes use of the Beaconstac platform for 90 days. We have a white label customized demo app that we can give you, which you can use to do all the stuff that I described in this webinar. We also have, we recommend beacon hardware. As you know, we work with companies like Gilo and Estimote and others, make sure that their hardware, which is awesome, works well for your beacon deployment. We're also happy to help you with phone and email support and best practices and assistance. Of course, everything that I've mentioned there's a lot of content that we have online on our developer blog, on our regular blog, and we have a bunch of material even on the documentation website. So I think that's a good place to start. And with that, we come to the very end of our Beaconstac webinar. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I know many of you have dialed in from time zones where it's really quite late at night. So thank you again for your time. Al, thank you so much for joining us. It was really a pleasure having you, and really very generous of you to share so much information about all the stuff that you guys have learned working with beacons. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, folks. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye. Have a nice day.